Reparations paid to the ancestors of the enslaved. When I first heard of this idea years ago, let's just say I was skeptical at best. After all, Senator Mitch McConnell is right. Both masters and slaves are long dead. Plus, where would this money come from? Don't raise my taxes. If reparations were given to the descendants of enslaved, what about indigenous peoples who lost a whole continent? And we couldn't just give money to Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey. They don't need it. Reparations would never fly politically. Polling shows this. But before we ever get into the how of reparations as a nation, I think we need to wrestle with the morality and the ethics of reparations as a nation. Since slavery was once legal, slaves could not sue someone that can't sue it because it was legal. Post-Civil War, all freed slaves wanted was for the federal government to give them some land to farm. This never happened, even though there was plenty of land to give to railroad companies and to land grants in the West and Midwest to mostly whites. One of the quantifiable effects of slavery is the huge wealth gap between whites and blacks to this day. I looked up some updated numbers. The median black household in America has around $24,000 in savings, investments, home equity, and other elements of wealth. The median white household has $189,000. According to the Federal Reserve, the average white family has 6 times more wealth than a black family. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a great long piece for The Atlantic more than 10 years ago entitled "The Case for Reparations." Coates makes a strong argument that it wasn't just slavery, but all the laws and policies after slavery, some passed by Congress, that has created this wealth gap. Let's look at one law and one person briefly. Clyde Ross was a black man born in 1923 in Mississippi to sharecroppers. To protect his life and escape the terror of racist violence, he, like many others, migrated to Chicago. He got a decent job, he worked hard, he had a family in a thriving post-World War II economy. However, he was not allowed to build the type and amount of equity and wealth that we all take for granted. Clyde wanted a piece of the American dream. He wanted to own his own house. And he was willing to work an extra job or two to make that happen. Coates recounts that in 1934, Congress created the Federal Housing Administration. The FHA insured private mortgages, causing a drop in interest rates and a decline in the size of down payment required to buy a house. But an insured mortgage was not a possibility for Clyde Ross. The FHA had adopted a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. On the maps, green areas rated A indicated in-demand neighborhoods that, as one appraiser put it, lacked a single foreigner or Negro. These neighborhoods were considered excellent prospects for insurance. Neighborhoods where Black people lived were rated D and were usually considered ineligible for FHA backing. They were colored in red. Redlining went beyond FHA-backed loans and spread to the entire mortgage industry, which was already rife with racism. Business people saw an opportunity. They started telling white homeowners that the blacks were coming and their house values would plummet, and encourage them to sell now at very low prices. So for example, a house formerly owned by a white family was purchased for $12,000 by these investors and then sold on contract to Clyde Ross for $27,500, like almost 2.5 times. The contract seller kept the deed and didn't give it up until it was paid in full. So Clyde had all the responsibilities of home ownership and all the disadvantages of renting. Clyde built no equity, and if the furnace went out, he had to fix it. If he missed a payment, he could forfeit all the payments he made, including the down payment. Eventually, Clyde and 500 other contract holders sued the contract sellers. They demanded money be paid for structural improvement of their properties and to be paid a reasonable sum of money that would make up for the money that they had lost. And they wanted the sellers to admit malicious wrongdoing and make sure that it doesn't ever happen again. Clyde Ross and the Contract Buyers League were not just suing and seeking money. They were seeking reparations. However, unfortunately, they did not win that case, but their pressure brought up that practice to a halt. In 1968, the Fair Housing Law bill was passed and helped eliminate these predatory practices as well. But the damage was already done. For decades, millions of dollars went to whites that did not go to blacks. Many of our parents, our grandparents, passed on this intergenerational wealth to us because of these FHA redlining practices. There is no doubt one of the reasons there is such a large wealth disparity between blacks and whites in this country, that redlining is one of those reasons. And I could go on and on here. There are numerous federal programs, including Social Security, that primarily had benefited whites. But what becomes apparent is it's not just a few businesses, a few corporations, or a few cities even. It's a system, a nationwide system. Unfairness was baked into some of the laws of Congress. So what some advocates of reparations say is the only entity capable of true financial reparations is the US federal government. The idea of reparations is to repair. It is to bring both groups back into unity. I learned a phrase from the Unitarian Universalist ethicist, Dr. Sharon Welch: cessation and assurances of non-repetition. It's worth repeating to get it in our brains. Cessation and assurances of non-repetition. It's one of the 5 basic components of reparations as described by the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, sometimes called NCOBRA, and is based on their understanding of international law. Number 1 is cessation and assurances and guarantees of non-repetition. Stop the harm you are causing and don't do it again. Restitution and reparation. Give back, make amends, make repairs in the relationship. And then compensation. Give money so that satisfaction and rehabilitation can happen. While the financial part is important, it is only part of what reparations really means. Reparation involves admitting wrongdoing and promising to never do it again on a collective level. Reparations promises a better, more just future. So what do reparations look like? Well, I have a couple short examples here. Quakers in New York, here, New England and Baltimore, went so far as to make membership contingent upon compensating one's former slaves. In 1782, the Quaker Robert Pleasants emancipated his 78 slaves, granted them 350 acres, and later built a school on their property and provided for their education. This, my friends, pun intended, is reparations. You know, come on, Quakers, friends, come on, come on. In the 1970s, Jimmy Carter's administration began to study reparations for Japanese Americans because of internment camps. The report ultimately said that Japanese Americans posed no threat, and the camps were solely based on racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of leadership. And President Ronald Reagan signed a bill that would officially issue an apology and give reparations. In 1992, $50,000 in today's dollars went to each living survivor. In the aftermath of World War II, West Germany was initially resistant to face their own history. But in 1952, West Germany admitted wrongdoing to killing millions of Jews and agreed to pay over $7 billion to Israel. Some Jewish Israelis did not want to accept the money because nothing can really bring back 6 million dead Jews. Some of this money went to individuals. It also funded 1/3 of Israel's electrical system, half of its railways. Israeli national banks calculate that during the 12 years of reparations from West Germany, it accounted for 15% of their gross domestic product and helped create 45,000 jobs. In 1838, Maryland Jesuits sold 272 of their slaves, breaking up families to support Georgetown University. In 2016, Georgetown University made a formal apology and have been trying to make reparations with some 13,000 descendants. Some money is being used to pay for education, elderly care, and programs that would promote racial healing, truth, and reconciliation. And most recently, in 2019, in Evanston, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, they created a reparations project where, again, this was in where redlining occurred and where many whites moved to and benefited from this FHA redlining. Every year, the descendants of those affected by unfair redlining are chosen and are given reparations money. The funding source is from a cannabis tax and a real estate transfer tax. Initially, grants of $25,000 could only be used to improve current homes or go towards mortgage payments, but they have since ended that and the money can be spent in any way. California has formally studied reparations, and their legislative Black Caucus just now introduced a reparations bill. So what if we lived with a reparations mindset, where we're conscious of the past and with a heart that is hoping for healing? The work of reparations challenges us to extend beyond our individual and personal reach into a collective enterprise. I'm curious about what we could do as a church. Reparations to the Mohawk? We are just starting to build relationships with some members of the Mohawk community. If those relationships continue to grow over the years, we could go into some kind of dialogue and find out what those reparations would look like. There are some investments like the Calvert Impact Capital Fund, which is in our endowment is a portion of this investment vehicle, which is, it provides microloans to small minority-owned businesses and housing for the poor. I believe that we can live in such a way that is repairing the world we inherited. If we have wronged someone, it's not enough just to apologize. We also need to make up for the wrong and accept our own biography. And so it is with reparations. The reason Black people are so far behind now is not because of now, Clyde Ross said. It's because of then. Coates says that we have to admit that American prosperity was ill-gotten and selective in its distribution. What is needed is a healing of the American psyche and a banishment of white guilt. As a country, we cannot look away and pretend to not see the past. A level of acceptance is needed. Otherwise, inequality will perpetuate into the future. Coates goes on to say that more important than any single check cut to any African American, the payment of reparations would represent America's maturation out of the childhood myth of its innocence and into a wisdom worthy of its founders. At the very least, Congress should pass H.R. 40 to study reparations. The history of harm is pretty clear, and I believe we can collectively right a wrong. Once we acknowledge the pain, once we admit the wrongdoing and promise never to do it again, we can repay and fix and repair. And this will bring groups of people back together in unity. May the work of reparations move forward. So may it be, and amen.